Hey guys, tonight we drift across windswept dunes under a blood-orange sun, hearing the distant rattle of caravan wagons and feeling the grit of desert sand slip between your teeth. You squint through the haze as rodents scurry along mud brick walls, searching for scraps of grain. Your clothes stick to you with the day's heat, and the omnipresent dust grinds against your eyeballs like sandpaper, while distant bells toll for someone's passing. It's peaceful, almost meditative, till you realize you probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, while you're at it, drop your location and local time in the chat so we can see which corner of the world you're drifting in from. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge through a Mongol trading hub where the first smoke wisped up from infected huts in the early 1330s. At this remote outpost, perched on the Silk Road's edge, yurts cluster like haphazard dominoes. The air smells dusty and metallic, as if the wind itself carries rust. You spot a half-starved marmot dragging itself across a tent flap, and freeze marmots were prized hunts. Yet now their burrows are plague pits. Mainstream consensus holds that the plague bacterium Yersinia pestis originated from wildlife reservoirs in Central Asia before slipping into human communities. Historians still argue whether the reservoir lay closer to Chinese provinces or in the steppes east of the Altai Mountains, stoking endless debates at ivory tables. Small rodents, especially gerbils and marmots, act as unwitting plague couriers. A fringe theory suggests nomadic shamans warned against marmot pelts, claiming the creatures whispered curses into every first strand wild enough that some elders avoided the pelts entirely. Out here, fleas carried on rodent fur leap to human hosts, lodging in armpits and waistbands. The first symptom often feels like a fanciful fever dream. Your head thumps against invisible drums, and your limbs grow heavy as if you're wearing armor made of lead. As the sun dips below distant sands, you hear pack animals muttering in low, irritated cough-seas. Those caravan camels can hack up a storm too. The fleas loosen their grip and hop on anything warm. Soon, you glimpse swelling lumps under the skin buboes in groin and armpit regions. Historians still argue whether the speed of transmission owed more to flea vectors or direct human contact, and that debate shapes how we map the disease's first wildfire spread. The Mongol couriers, masters of fast relay, unwittingly turned epic distances into a death line. A rider carrying an urgent letter flees one camp for the next, leaves behind sick servants, and the next day, those servants collapse into fever. Traders pack spices, silk, and gossip alike, and the plague hops from sack to tent flap, then into barrow wheels. Within months, the infection leaps thousands of miles long before modern flights condensed global travel into hours. You swat at gnats drawn by the evening smoke from samovars churning tea in iron kettles. Somewhere inside, someone coughs onto a wooden bench. Standard medieval medicine prescribes bloodletting and potions scented with frankincense. But out here, the first physicians, called bakwi, adorn faces with fragrant hemp and clove to mask. The stench fringe remedies include stuffing the nostrils with mint jelly or wearing a live frog in your hat to absorb the miasma. Yet none can halt the invisible bacteria by nightfall. Doors are nailed shut. Sentries circle like wolves around fallen livestock. No one trusts a neighbor. The slime of paranoia coats every handshake. This small Mongol outpost becomes an unintentional laboratory for a plague that will darken half the continent's skies. The Mongol, Kane's famed yam relay network was a marvel of speedy communication, with messenger horses switching mounts every few miles. You watch a rider gallop off into mirage-like heat, sweat dripping into his collar, unaware that black rats stow away under saddle blankets. Fleas riding on rat bellies spread from horse station to station. No baggage checks, no temperature scans. Only the thrill of the ride and the crack of hooves on hardened earth. You almost envy the fleas. They have the best road trip ever. No passport required, high-fiving each other in microscopic glee as they click over borders in local lore. Shamans speak of spotted snakes burrowing in rodent nests or the wind death, a spirit-ferrying disease across the plains. Shamans sometimes painted their faces with bear grease and garlic paste before performing exorcisms on plague victims. Historians still argue whether these rituals genuinely slowed the spread or simply slowed rational thought. Quirky record mentions villagers tying onions to doorways. Believing the pungent aroma would repel death to bad onions didn't come with a plague repel guarantee. It's the kind of fringe remedy you might laugh at now, unless you were breathing your last, centuries later. Scientists drilling into ancient graves in Mongolia extract Yersinia pestis DNA from medieval teeth, confirming the link between Asian rodent reservoirs and the famed 14th century pandemic. One DNA strain dates back to the early 1330s, matching the timeline from local tax records lamenting sudden population decline. Historians still argue whether climatic shifts in the 1310s triggered rodent migrations that set the whole chain in motion. You imagine tree-ring data telling its own story. Bitter winters followed by wet springs. It's perfect for rodent population booms. Nature and empire conspiring with microscopic hitchhikers to spark one of history's deadliest outbreaks. As twilight settles, you find yourself retracing the first steps of a plague that will soon charge across continents. The tinkling of a distant lute drifts through the camp, a strangely cheerful soundtrack given the circumstances. You touch a smooth bone fragment half buried in the dust, a testament to those who fell before names could be recorded. The night air turns cool, carrying the scent of crushed sage and old blankets, as if the camp itself exhales a last weary breath. In the flicker of lantern light, the outlines of yurts seem to quiver with unseen menace. With every breath of dusty air, you sense this quiet outpost is just the wick to a fuse that will explode into a wildfire of sorrow. Ready your senses, our journey beyond these dunes is just beginning. You step off the dusty steps and onto a creaking wooden deck, where salt spray licks at your skin and gulls wheel overhead like disinterested security drones. The caravan corridors you've been following morph into tangled maritime routes. Crews lash sails to harness every gust, while below decks rats scuttle along the planks, noses twitching for spilled grain. The promise of silk and spices once spurred merchants to load holds to the brim, but now those same corridors carry an even darker cargo. You feel the ship's timbers groan beneath your feet and wonder if they're whispering warnings in an ancient tongue by the mid-1340s. Genoese merchants crowd the Black Sea port of Kaffa, negotiating fur and grain with local tatters. A grim siege ensues. And when the Mongol army resorts to hurling plague-infected corpses over the city walls, infection seeps into every corner. This 1346 siege of Kaffa is often cited as the moment bubonic plague boarded the world's trading network and set sail for the Mediterranean, one of the earliest well-documented outbreaks linking warfare to pandemic spread. Historians still argue whether those catapulted cadavers truly unleashed the disease, or if it simply rode in clandestine on rats and fleas slipping out of besieged tents. Below deck, wood planks stink of mildew, sweat, and rotting cargo. You trace the hull's curvature with your palm. Every knot in the timber feels like a heartbeat of an unwelcome passenger. Rat droppings crunch underfoot. Fringe lore claims sailors kept live cats in cages, not for mouse patrol, but because the cats could. Whisper to the sea's spirits, truly a perfect charm, if you believe such stories. Others swear by cutting cuttlefish bones into amulets hung from masts, believing the ink might repel invisible miasma. You might chuckle now, but staring into a brine-dark hold at midnight, you'd cling to any superstition that meant surviving. Another sunrise, dot above. Salty wind tangles your hair and carries the faint hum of Arabic traders belting out port calls in distant harbors. You feel each chime of the watch bell reverberate through your bones, reminding you that even the Mediterranean's shimmering waters can hide death beneath their lulling waves. By late 1347, 3 Genoese galleys limp into Messina, their decks crawling with feverish sailors and infected rats fleeing the slop bucket. Panic unfolds in the streets. People slam doors, stash valuables in locked chests, and send for priests to sprinkle holy water on doorposts, a ritual that feels oddly like today's hand sanitizer craze. You brush your fingertips along a rope coil, noticing the slick sheen of dried sweat and salt. The smell is fragrant enough to make a perfumer weep. Perfumers wept at all. As the docks fill with the ill rumors spread faster than the black rats. One dockhand jokes that the rats just want a vacation in Sicily, oblivious to the irony. Another sailor pretends to recruit fleas as deckhands, quipping they're the best appraisers of grain quality, though their vocabulary consists largely of sneezes and covert coughing. That's 2 jokes down, 1 to go. Messina's council, overwhelmed and terrified of maritime commerce's dark side, poses the earliest recorded urban quarantine in the West. Ships are forced to anchor offshore for 30 days a term later, stretched to 40, or 40 giorni, which gave us the word quarantine. Mainstream records credit Venice with institutionalizing these measures a few years later, crafting laws that cordoned off entire islands to stem infection. Historians still argue whether these early maritime quarantines were effective shields, or merely grand gestures that offered false comfort, with houses shuttered and harbor gates sealed. Desperate merchants smuggle goods ashore under cover of night, hiding bolts of cloth in hay carts. You follow a shadowy figure as he creeps past moonlit warehouses, clutching a burlap sack that might hold silk's worth of fortune or rats worth a death sentence. The thrill of illicit trade almost feels like a smuggler's high, adrenaline mixed with dread, like texting your ex while sober. Your path traces from Messina to Marseille, where medieval port life teems with fishermen gutting nets, gypsy families tucked in every alley, and the smell of fried fish mingling with sour despair. Fleas jump ship and jump into your boots, finding warm toes to congregate around. You heel click to shake them off, but they're tenacious little freeloaders. One fisherman swears by wearing onion garlands around his neck, insisting their pungent aura sends fleas packing just like garlic chases vampires. Only bum Pierre dot in Marseille's plague registers. Officials note the death fog rolling in from the docks. In towns down the coast, authorities scramble to mimic the maritime quarantines, ordering feasts to be canceled and churches to ring no more bells. Funerals are now private, confined to small cloisters away from the living. You wander past walls, scrawled with chalk, crosses marking infected households. An inescapable reminder that disease maps human panic more vividly than any cartographer's ink. By late 1348, the contagion surges northward along river routes into Provence, then spreads via alpine passes to the Rhone River Valley and beyond. Trade caravans morph into streams of illness. Pilgrimages turn into vectors of doom, and itinerant entertainers unknowingly become plague ballads broadcast from town to town. You lean against a riverbank stone, studying ripples as though they carry clues to the plague's secrets. Historians still argue whether river travel propelled the disease faster than caravans slogging through mountains, as you trace your finger along a grain of sand at the water's edge. You recall Sea shanties bellowed by deckhands, oddly buoyant, despite mounting corpses in the water chute bilges. One chorus goes, "No cargo more dear than a breath," an off-key lament that somehow beats out church bells when it comes to seasonal hits. That's your third joke maybe. This is the lice telling you you've hit your quota. Tracing these deadly arteries between Asia and Europe, if you sense that commerce's promise of exotic goods carried a heavier toll than any chest of jewels. Spices once worth their weight in gold now taint every nook of warehouses with latent dread. Every loaded cart, every battered ship, is a silent coffin. From Kaffa to Marseille and beyond, you follow the invisible trail of plague as it binds continents in pain. You step back onto solid ground in Marseille, yet the breeze still tastes of brine and foreboding. Rope burns itch on your palms, and the distant clang of harbor chains now sounds eerily like funeral knells. Silk traders mutter prayers before uncovering crates. Sailors pinch noses at rat-bitten ropes. In every port, across every sea corridor, you witness how a world-craving connection ripped itself apart in fear, reminding you that sometimes the shortest path to anywhere is paved with the deepest dread. You wake on a straw mattress pressed flush against cold stones, the dawn light filtering through a shutter that won't fully close. Your skin prickles as though tiny needles trace every inch of you, each breath tasting of stale garlic and vinegar from yesterday's attempts at purifying the ward. Someone groans in the corner, neck bent at an awkward angle, lips cracked like desert clay. You shift, and the straw sighs beneath you, setting your spine on edge. This morning, you realize the plague's real terror isn't the rats or the rumor sits. What happens inside your own body? Your head pounds with a relentless rhythm, each pulse sending shockwaves through your temples. A mainstream fact to tuck into your mental satchel. Plague symptoms usually emerge 2 to 6 days after the flea bite, making it feel like one moment you're fine and the next you're trading your heartbeat for a drum solo in your skull. Historians still argue whether that incubation window varied significantly by climate or region, and if it shifted as the plague hopped across Europe's latitudes. Meanwhile, your own internal thermostat has gone haywire one moment. You're shivering beneath 3 woolen blanket layers. The next, you're slick with sweat that smells faintly of rotting oranges. Under your arm and in the groin crease, you feel swollen knots the size of walnuts pressing against your veins. These buboes, as all the learned physicians call them, throb like angry wasps trapped under skin. A crude scratch test pressing on the tender swellings releases a blackish tinge, macabre stain that gives bubonic plague its nickname, the Black Death. Everyday life has never felt more like a low-budget nightmare sequence. One obscure fringe remedy from a gardener's journal recommends tying a marigold bouquet to your belt, said to draw out the poison the smell alone might have been enough to keep most people away, which, honestly, could count as prevention in anyone's book. Fever curls through you in waves. First, it's just a slow burn, like a charcoal ember pressed beneath your skin. You try counting sheep or rather condemned villagers, but the flickering image of bells tolling for the dead keeps hijacking your thoughts. Your pulse races to a gallop you can't control, creaking like cartwheels that lost their axles, while the sweat forms puddles under your armpits and along your spine. You swat at phantom flies dancing before your face. Modern asides slip into your mind, like wishing for a Starbucks venti iced latte to cool you down. Only this pain can't be soothed by a shot of espresso. By midday, dark blotches bloom across your thighs and belly, mottled like bruises left by oversized fingers. They're not painful, exactly, more like ominous decorations signaling your body's revolt. In rare pneumonic cases, you'd cough up blood and infect others with every exhalation. Historians still argue whether pneumonic transmission accounted for most frontline deaths. especially in crowded cities with smog and sewers choked with waste. For now, you're stuck with the classic bubonic form, Kiev. But every ragged breath still feels like inhaling shards of glass. You taste iron with every gasp. Kiev is if your gums wept tiny rivulets of hemoglobin. The room spins so vigorously that the carved beams overhead seem to droop, flickering like sunset clouds on a stormy horizon. A friar shuffles past, carrying a bowl filled with warm water, scented with roses' wives swore by rosewater gargles. To soothe sore throats, but here it seems as effective as hugging a cactus. He murmurs a prayer and slips to lozenges of sugar and saffron onto your tongue, claiming they'll sweeten your humors. You wonder if the lozenge's only triumph is staving off SCURVY. In the corner, a wounded dancer from Provence convulses. With hallucinations, convinced he's conversing with Saint Roch patron saint against the plague, who's offering him a golden key to unlock his salvation. You cross yourself, not sure if it's for him or yourself, and press a damp cloth to your forehead. Historians still argue whether these saintly visions were deliriums, byproduct, or genuine mystical encounters recorded through rose-tinted chronicles. You focus on the cloth's damp coolness, a fleeting reprieve from the furnace raging inside. You dot your tongue feels swollen, heavy as a loaf of unsliced bread, making speech a sloppy, pickled affair. Every swallow churns your belly like a potter's wheel gone rogue. You crave water but recoil at the thought of its chill. You'd take lukewarm pond scum if offered, though no one's handing that around either, as the afternoon light dims. Another mainstream detail settles into your mind. Mortality rates for untreated bubonic plague could reach nearly 60%. That's like flipping a coin where heads equals life, tails equals eternal rest. You wouldn't bet your last penny on that, eh? Nurse, bless her for braving the stink, presses a poultice of onion slices and figs onto your buboes, claiming the sweetness of figs will draw out the malice. Another fringe tidbit from a hedge. Doctor's handbook suggests binding the wound with spider webs soaked in vinegar. You can't decide whether spider silk sounds more magical or more likely to get tangled with your shrinking sanity. Each remedy arrives with hopeful eyes, as though the cure lies somewhere between a sliced onion and a spider farm. Night falls, and the ward's candles gutter in the soft breeze that sneaks through broken shutters. The smell of smoldering herbs drifts in an unpleasant reminder of last night's bedside fumigations. You cough, a wet, rattling sound that echoes off stone walls like a banshee's call. Fellow sufferers moan in unison, your collective misery. A lullaby twisted by anguish. You pinch your nose as a rat scurries across the floor, whiskers twitching as if mocking your condition. It hops onto a stool, pauses, and then leaps into the shadows. That little furball has more energy than you do right now. It's probably better social distancing instincts. Your fever flashes back with renewed vigor, and you sink deeper into the straw. Visions of your hometown's fountain glimmering in your passant. In your mind, children laughing, fresh bread baking, clean water running clear. It feels like a faraway dream. You squeeze your eyes shut, willing sleep to take you somewhere cooler than this plague pit of misery. In that haze, you think you hear the faint tinkle of church bells, though real ones have gone silent for days. Instead, you imagine them tolling, gently in some distant future echoes of a world that will endure beyond the black blotches and fever dreams, as your vision dims. You whisper a joke you can barely catch yourself. If I survive, I'm never trusting rodents again, especially the ones wearing fur coats. It's your third joke for this section. Even if it sounds a bit rattled, you feel the damp cloth slipping down your forehead. It's a last anchor to reality before the fever claims you for the night. In the early hours, you drift between consciousness and something else, perhaps death. Perhaps a lich dreamland where onions and figs hold no sway. The wart's door creaks open, and a sliver of moonlight cuts across your face. You blink, trying to decide if this is another hallucination or the real thing. The world outside might as well be a painting, but here, in the lantern's glow, you know the plague's grip hasn't loosened yet. You slip through a narrow alley into a courtyard where the scent of crushed herbs mingles with coppery blood. Lanterns dangle from ropes, casting jittery shadows on scuffed cobblestones, slick with runoff from makeshift operating tables. Here, barber surgeons and physicians cluster like mismatched teams at a midnight rescue scene, all determined to wrestle the plague from writhing bodies, though most will end up wrestling their own mortality instead. You approach a long wooden bench where a barber in striped red and white robes wields a curved razor, the blade glinting under lamplight. He invites you to recline, though he looks as likely to nick an artery as shave a chin. Mainstream practices of the time hinged on bloodletting to rebalance. Humor's letting the bad blood out was thought to purge toxins and restore health. You've already seen villagers tie onions to doorways, swallow rosewater lozenges, even where live frogs for miasma protections, so cutting your jugular seems almost traditional. Historians still argue whether bloodletting relieved fevers by reducing fluid overload or simply hastened the journey to the grave. The barber presses a leather cup against your skin and pulls it free to reveal tiny bruises where he'll lance veins. You wince, imagining your lifeblood dribbling into a pewter bowl so medieval, so YouTube-friendly. You recall the marmot-born fleas hitching rides on yurts back in Section 1. Now envisioning fleas sliding off your drained arm and scouting for a warm new host. The barber hums a tune about all the better to spot buboes, though the only things he spots are glistening red teardrops nearby. A physician in a long dark gown and beaked mask inspects a plague victim's swollen groin. The mask bristles with fragrant herbs, lavender, mint juniper stuffed into its snout to filter out the stench. You can't help comparing him to a giant wading bird, majestic if birds were terrifying portents of doom. Fringe lore credits these masks with magical power, claiming the beak store's protective spells when inscribed with holy texts. You chuckle your second Joka Pilgrim's version of high-end air purification. Circa 1348. An apprentice ices his forehead with cloth soaked in vinegar and crushed mint, hoping the fumes will draw heat from his temples. You wonder if modern cold-pressed coffee offers the same perk, a jolt and a chill in one gulp. The physician pries open a lanced bubo and scoops out oozing fluid with a spoon carved from boxwood. It plops onto a ceramic plate-tan unfortunate pancake of passandew. Shudder. He seals the wound with a poultice of crushed chamomile and snake fat, promising the venom will kill the disease. Yet another fringe remedy. Snake fat was believed to seal in life, much as duct tape fixes broken pots in your kitchen. Across from you, a barber surgeon brandishes leeches, those five-legged freeloaders that suck blood at a glacial pace. He deposits them onto a man's swollen shoulder, and the leeches glug greedily before dropping off, engorged like tiny sacks of regret. The man coughs into a linen wrap. Wet, rasping sounds echo in the courtyard. Historians still argue whether leech therapy actually relieved pressure on buboes or simply spread plague from one victim to another via contaminated leech tanks. For now, each leech is a gamble, a free ride to safety, or a mobile plague vector. With extra suction power, you wander to a corner where a healer slathers a yellowish paste onto a patient's scalp. The mixture gleams like mustard under torchlight. It's crocodile dung sunscreen, touted by an obscure travel writer as the latest in protective ointments. The writer claimed it blocked evil airs and kept one's complexion unblemished, added cosmetic bonus. You wrinkle your nose. The notion of rubbing dried crocodile crap on your skin feels like an extreme peel treatment gone wrong. Yet desperate times call for desperate measures, and this paste is selling faster than spiced wine. That's your third joke. The ultimate anti-aging secret from the Nile Delta. Next season on TikTok. A group of surgeons argues over the best bloodletting spot, wrist or ankle. Each location purportedly taps different humors, sanguine or melancholic. Roll your eyes as you overhear them squabble like chefs debating risotto rice types. Historians still argue whether drawing blood from the feet kept infection out of the heart or merely turned ankles into magnets for fleas. You sidestep the debate, content to keep both feet firmly on the damp ground, near the gates. A peddler hawks bottled potions of theriac, a concoction blending dozens of spices, opiates, and viper's venom. He promises it wards off plague if taken thrice daily between salted almonds and fig wafers. You peer at the labeled teeny scrolls of Latin barely legible. Wonder if today's dietary supplements boast better clarity. You cough politely and imagine these pills on the shelf next to kale chips and gummy bears. By dusk, you're sticky with sweat and scented as if you've bathed in a herb garden gone mad. You pass a group of weary midwives offering to birth souls into the next world, chanting prayers and furiously dabbing at wounds with wine-soaked rags. They claim alcohol kills the plague. Modern researchers would call that mild antisepsis, centuries ahead of its time. Whether those midwives reduced infection rates or merely spread it via shared basins is a matter authors in ivory towers continue to debate. You retreat to the courtyard's edge, where a pile of discarded bandages grows like a fungus. The gutters nearby run dark, and you almost mistake them for tiny rivers of ink. Night air brushes over you, carrying clove smoke from burning braziers placed to cleanse the surroundings. You draw a deep breath, wishing for oxygen instead of miasma. As you brush stray straw from your robes, you notice a plaque hammered above the gate, a skull and crossbones beside the words caveat emptor. Warning would-be patients to consider. The cost of cures. You wink at the morbid joke, remembering your own pact with these barber surgeons. Surrender your blood. Hope for life. You take one last glance at a barber, giving a quick haircut to calm an anxious gentleman, the only luxury. These days, a tidy neck and a straight razor's buzz. Who knew a trim could double as a divine blessing? With a final nod, you slip back into the city's maze, your wrists still sticky. Heart thumping in time with the courtyard's distant coughs. Your skin tingles from the evening breeze. And you tell yourself that tomorrow you might try a dragon's blood tincture for protection. Though you suspect dragon blood is just another name for fig leaf extract, historians still argue whether these bandied cures offered genuine relief or served as charlatans' hall passes. You press onward, leaving behind the courtyard of clipped hair, spilled blood, and crocodile dung. The plague doesn't pause for self-care rituals, and neither do you. You step into what used to be a bustling market square and find tumbleweeds of discarded cloaks drifting across empty stalls. The wooden carts that once groaned under sacks of grains stand abandoned, spokes snapping like brittle bones under the weight of nothing. You hear distant chimney smoke, but taste only ash. The town's hearths are cold because the people who fed them have either fled or collapsed into mass graves beyond the churchyard. It's eerily quiet, save for the creak of a solitary gate swinging on its hinges and the low moan of wind through a broken doorway. In normal times, 50 or 60 customers might crowd each merchant's stall. Now only one vendor dares show face, peddling spoiled turnips at double price. That price hike isn't hype. Markets ground to a halt when buyers vanished, and food rotted in storehouses while no one dared to forage in the fields. Mainstream records tell us the plague wiped out roughly a third of Europe's population in just a few years, leaving fields untilled and towns half empty. Historians still argue whether this sudden labor shortage accelerated social mobility or simply deepened feudal exploitation. As lords hiked wages for scarcity laborers only to clamp down later, you wander past a trio of shuttered homes linked by rope, neighbors literally tying their houses together, believing that physical bonds would ward off disease. Fringe lore claims some villagers strung bells on those ropes so that any movement by fleeing neighbors would jingle an alarm. The bells were supposed to shoo away evil spirits that traveled on the wind. You can almost picture someone distracted at dawn, chasing after a runaway chicken, inadvertently saving an entire family by breaking the rope bond at just the right moment. As you follow a narrow lane, you step over broken chairs, ripped quilts, and the occasional stray shoe, ominous. Modern aside, like pictures of lost AirPods and credit cards fluttering in your city's gutters after a storm. Dogs yip in backyards where people have boarded up windows, rationing their bread to the barkers. The smell here is a pungent stew of sour milk, uncollected waste, and lingering funerary smoke. Funeral pyres blaze in courtyards behind locked gates, sending ribbons of sorrowful orange light against dark brick walls. Each flame consumes another layer of trust, as families seal their dead away, lest neighbors come too close, in one courtyard. You watch pallbearers, men too weak to carry full coffins, hurl bodies into mass pits as though tossing out spoiled fish. It's a grim reminder that medieval sanitation and burial practices couldn't keep pace with the carnage. Fringe accounts mention that some grieving widows dipped handkerchiefs in rosewater and wore them over their faces, convinced the scent would repel miasma. Others smeared lantern oil across door frames in hopes the oily sheen would trap plague clouds. You pause at a cauldron of discarded rosemary and rue, half submerged in rainwater, and wonder if any of these rituals truly offered comfort beyond illusion. The cathedral bells are muted clergy, fear mass gatherings will spread infection, so they strike only at noon, the single toll resonating like a death knell across the hollow streets. You walk under vaulted archways that once echoed with merchants haggling over wool prices. Now the quiet breeds suspicion. A man peers at you from a shuttered window, clutching a spear in trembling hands. You tip your hat and back away, mindful that suspicion has become currency more precious than gold. Historians still argue whether such distrust among neighbors slowed the plagues spread by enforcing isolation or amplified suffering by cutting people off from vital aid. Around the next corner, you find a makeshift bakery where flour lies unused on dusty tables. One baker, his face gaunt and eyes sunken, offers you a charred loaf he swears is blessed by St. Giles. You bite in reflexively and taste charcoal and desperation joke number 1 of the section. Medieval, gluten-free, sugar-free, flavor-free diet. The baker grins weakly, revealing stained teeth, slips you a small pouch of dried lavender, claiming it wards off evil humors. You accept it as both perfume and peril, stuffing it into your pocket as twilight creeps over collapsed roofs. You glimpse a group of children shambling barefoot through the dust. They play a macabre game, imitating the shape of funeral pyres, with twigs and stones, chanting burn, burn, burn in hollow murmurs. It's both unsettling and childishly innocent, the kind of fringe ritual historians still argue might have been a coping mechanism or merely juvenile folly in the face of unthinkable despair. You watch one boy break his twig tower with a shriek of delight and accidental laugh amid tragedy in the distance. A mill wheel stands still, lodged by debris and ropes twisted with ragged pennants. No millers turn grain into flour here, so townsfolk must travel farther for basic bread or subsist on roots and hardtack. You joke number 2. If you thought your pizza delivery was late, imagine waiting weeks for flour and watching your sourdough starter abandon you. The joke falls flat in your throat as you realize real starvation has set in alongside disease. On a rickety bench outside the town hall, elders sit in silent council, their faces marked by shock and resignation. They discuss levying emergency taxes to pay for mass burials, arguing over whether it's fair to charge survivors a tithe for disposing of the deceased. Historians still argue whether such communal levies fostered social solidarity or merely deepened class resentments, laying groundwork for future revolts. The debate churns like unsettled dough, half-baked but full of tension. You spot a butcher's block repurposed as an altar, candles melted onto chiseled names of the missing, wax pooling like tears. Pilgrims ring a battered bell and leave behind scraps of cloth as memorial offerings, hoping that such votive acts might coax the town's fortune back. Fringe belief holds that these cloth fragments, draped over charred beams, can summon a protective spirit to heal the land, whether spirits heed rag offerings or not. The ritual stitches a ragged sense of hope into the community's fraying tapestry. The moon rises over the collapsed bell tower, bathing the scene in ghostly silver. You breathe in the cold night air, tasting the mixture of smoke, rot, and a faint hint of cinnamon from a long-dead chemist's spilled vial. You quip joke number 3. Welcome to medieval aromatherapy. O'Day funeral with subtle spice notes. It's a dark humor born of necessity, a coping balm for nerves on edge. You step onto a wooden footbridge spanning the canal, where rotting boards creak underfoot. In the water below, discarded wooden crosses and tattered shrouds float like skeletal lily pads, drifting toward unseen horrors in the murk. You lean on the rail, watching the reflections of funeral pyres dance as though applauding the rivers. Grim cargo. Each flicker reminds you that humanity's bonds can snap as easily as a thin plank, leaving only splinters of memory behind. Turning your back on the town, you feel the echo of lost livelihoods, shuttered businesses, and broken promises clinging to your cloak. The plague has severed the threads that wove this community together, familial ties. Apprenticeships, market days all unraveled by an invisible loom. It's somewhere beneath the ash and debris, a new fabric begins to take shape, one stitched by survivors who will rebuild on foundations of fear, solidarity, and hard-earned resilience. You step down a winding lane where torchlight flickers against stone walls carved with prayers and warnings. A hush falls as you join a procession of flagellants, their white robes soaked in sweat and self-administered blood. Souls convinced that mortifying the flesh might placate divine wrath. Wooden crosses clatter at their shoulders, echoing like distant church bells you've missed since the plague silenced them. Mainstream accounts record that these penitential bands swelled from Italy into Germany in 1349, whipping themselves in public displays of piety as the church hierarchy wavered between endorsement and condemnation. Historians still argue whether the flagellants genuinely stemmed the plague's tide, or merely fanned the flames of mass hysteria. A friar in the procession intones Latin litanies, his voice cracking like an old wooden door. You feel the vibration in your chest and wonder if it rouses faith or fanatics. Villagers line the streets, kneeling on stone thresholds, crossing themselves as the flagellants pass. Yet in the crowd, you glimpse faces twisted with fear and suspicion, eyes darting toward the unknown, desperate for a scapegoat. In one shadowed alley, a fringe belief surfaces. Some freethinkers whisper that flagellants secretly consumed fly, agaric mushrooms to induce visions of divine judgment. You stifle a grin at the idea of psychedelic penance, remind yourself that despair drives us to exotic cures. From frog hats to fungi, soon the procession halts at a Jewish quarter wooden barricade. You witness a charge of well-poisoning hurled at the resident, an accusation so baseless it could have sprouted from a drunken jester's dream. Nonetheless, mobs torch synagogues and haul families into the street. Mainstream records tell us over 200 Jewish communities across Central Europe were destroyed between 1348 and 1351, victims of violent pogroms fueled by panic. Historians still argue whether these massacres were spontaneous eruptions of fear or orchestrated by local lords eager to seize property. You avert your eyes as hooded men whip themselves again, rending their robes to expose crimson welts. Yet, your mind drifts to earlier scenes: mass graves, rotting pyres, communities on lockdown. The flagellants claim their bloodletting might earn divine mercy, an odd mirror of the barber surgeon's futile cuts. Joke 1 bubbles up. If the plague needed more contestants for a self-harm contest, these flagellants could win gold medals. You force it down, mindful that laughter feels impious amid so much sorrow. Above the rabbi's house, you notice potted rue hanging from windowsills, herbal hangings meant to repel evil spirits. Fringe lore insists that wearing a rue sprig over your heart grants immunity to curses, though it probably does nothing against flea bites. You inhale the bitter scent and brace yourself for the crowd's verdict. A group of young men drags a trembling tailor from his shop, accusing him of mocking Christ by practicing Jewish alchemy. He denies it, voice trembling like wind chimes in a storm. But no defense seems strong enough against collective fear as the rabbi steps forward. The mob pushes, manacles clink, and a dozen Jewish families are forced to choose between baptism or death. Some accept holy water as a lifeline. Others cling to their faith, whispering psalms until flames consume them. You catch a child's desperate father, "Help me," though no one answers. You fight back a wave of revulsion at how swiftly neighbor turns traitor when faith snaps under the pressure of terror. Historians still argue whether the church's vacillating stance empowered its persecutors or if secular courts could have tempered the rage. You pull your cloak tighter and slip behind a pillory where heretics once stood for preaching that the plague was Mother Nature's cleansing fire. Fringe rumor says some itinerant preachers claimed the true cure lay in communal confession, and that only those too proud to bend their knees would perish. You smirk confession booths or gallows. Pick your poison. The piazza's dust swirls around you as if the earth itself weeps for the lost. Nearby, a traveling preacher hands out charred bones from a supposed martyr's relic collection, promising prayers in exchange for donations. You hold the fragment between thumb and forefinger. It feels like a scrap of coal, and you half expect it to burn your skin. Yet pilgrims clutch these shards as though they hold the spark of divine intervention. It's joked to pricks your lips. Medieval crowdfunding, circa 1349. Donate your coin, save your soul. You tuck the bone into your pocket, partly as a keepsake, partly as a grim reminder that faith can be both a shield and a sword. At dusk, the flagellants resume their march through empty fields. Lanterns sway in the cooling air, casting long, skeletal shadows. You step quietly alongside them, listening to their chant, "Have mercy, Lord, have mercy on us." In the distance, you hear the low moan of someone pleading for mercy too late. The wind rustles through tall grasses, carrying the faint echo of church bells from Section 5's burned bell tower on oral callback to hope's faint persistence beyond devastation. Night settles, and the moon rises over a lone cross erected at the edge of a mass grave. Torches reveal mounds of earth, each marked by simple wooden stakes. You pause, breathing in the soft scent of night-blooming jasmine, on incongruous perfume that somehow soothes your frayed nerves. A lone flagellant kneels, hands clasped, tears staining bony cheeks. You kneel beside him, silence folding around you like a velvet shroud. No words seem fitting here, nor prayers, nor curses, as you rise. You glance back at the procession threading between plowed fields, turned burial grounds. You ponder whether these acts of extreme devotion have drawn plague's edge nearer or pushed it back, even for a moment. Historians still argue whether the flagellant movement ultimately strengthened communal bonds by united penance or sowed deeper divisions by scapegoating and vigilante zeal. You walk away under the star-speckled sky, heart heavy with the cost of faith in a time of fear. You feel the roughness of the ragged cloak on your shoulders and recall a quirky remedy. Some whispered that wearing one's own hair in a locket at the throat could absorb God's gaze and deflect divine punishment. You shiver at the thought of clipping your locks for a prayer necklace joke. 3 surfaces, nothing says I trust you. Lured like a snip from your own scalp, the path ahead lies in darkness, but the faint glow of distant chapel windows promises both sanctuary and suspicion. You step forward, carrying the weight of human fervor, the sting of whips, and the ash of ruined homes. Ahead, you sense that fear and faith will continue their uneasy dance as the plague presses on its next act of terror waiting just beyond the faint halo of candlelight. You step off a weaving gondola onto creaking wooden planks that smell of algae and rot. The lapping water beneath, murmuring like a lullaby, turned sinister. Morning light glints off palazzo facades, their marble columns flecked with salt and pigeon droppings. A lone gondolier hums a melancholic aria as he ties his boat to a battered post, the rope's fibers rough against your fingers. You inhale the brine-tinged breeze and feel Venice's pulse, a city built on water, commerce, and now, containment. Here, in 1377, Venice pioneers a novel defense, cordoning off arriving ships and their crews on an isolated island called Santa Maria di Nazareth, Kio. You watch a line of bedraggled sailors shuffle off a merchant galley onto rickety planks leading to wooden huts. Each man carries his own bundle, face masks pulled tight or at least fashioned from cloth scraps saturated in vinegar and wormwood. It's 40-day enforced exile, or 40 giorni. It gets the word quarantine and becomes the blueprint for pandemic control across Europe. Historians still argue whether this rigid separation truly halted outbreaks or merely delayed them, giving patricians a false sense of security. A city official, dressed in a black silk robe with an embroidered winged lion on the chest, stamps a document authorizing the arrival. You note the seal's weight in your palm, reminded of the crocodile dung sunscreen token you passed in Section 4 only. This stamp carries governmental power rather than foul-smelling ointment. As the official scrawls your name, you can't help quipping. At least nobody's offering dragon blood tinctures here, though you'd probably pay extra for a dose of mythical immunity. Joke 1 lands softly in the salt air dot past the quarantine checkpoint. You enter a narrow lagoon channel where hobbled vessels lie moored, their decks saddled with pallets of oranges, fats of olive oil, and curiously, whistles fashioned from hollow reeds. Fringe lore says each ship's captain used these whistles to summon protective water spirits, blowing 3 times at dawn to ward off death winds. You blow gently on one, producing a shrill note that echoes off brick walls. The sound spooks a flock of seagulls, sending them into panicked flight. You laugh. If scaring off gulls counts as repelling disease, you've found the world's cheapest biohazard alarm. That's joke 2, echoing across the courtyard. You stroll past wood-fired ovens where coconut husk braziers burn herbs like thyme and mugwort to fumigate arriving goods. Merchants stand beside wicker crates, stripping silk bolts and laying them on racks for sun-drying. Each crate receives a dusting of powdered sulfur, another fringe remedy believed to cleanse invisible vapors. Yet, as the sun warms the silk, the air grows thick with acrid smoke that tickles your throat and makes your eyes water. You recall the rosewater lozenges from Section 3, and muse that no amount of cloves could outscent sulphur's bite. A sentinel leans on a halberd carved with angelic faces, a tea's helm perched askew on a table. He recounts ruefully that his commander once tried to vaccinate the islands, cats thinking they'd absorb plague fleas and spare the population, only to discover feline immunology is more stubborn than human folly. You nod solemnly. Vaccinating cats. That's one way to let the dogs have their day. His chuckle rumbles through his breastplate. A reminder that humor persists even when fear rules the waves. As midday heat ripples along the canal, you wander into a stone courtyard ringed by tall walls. Here, priests bless the quarantine sick with holy water from a tarnished chalice. Their robes rustle like dried leaves as they pass, offering whispered benedictions. Survivors, gaunt and hollow-eyed, clutch prayer beads and cross themselves. Others cling only to hope. A monk sprinkles lavender oil on their shrouded forms, lavender believed to repel fleas with its violet aroma. Historians still argue whether such aromatic fumigations had any real effect on Yersinia. Pesties were simply distracted, afflicted souls long enough to die of something else. You settle on a low stone bench to watch. Shadow patterns dance across your lap as sunlight filters through crenellated battlements. You feel a subtle vibration in the wall, the muffled toll of a distant church bell protesting the quarantine's imposed silence. In the hush, you recognize that authorities elsewhere copied Venice's model. By the late 15th century, cities from Dubrovnik to Marseille build their own lazarettos cordon zones on islands or outside gates. Interstate travel now demands not only passports but also proof of quarantine compliance, a bureaucratic twist echoing into modern health certificates. A gnarled apothecary hawks vials of aqua di sanita, water infused with pine needles, juniper berries, and magical runic scripts etched on the glass. He claims that on nights of a full moon, the liquid glows faintly, proof of celestial blessing. You peer at a sunbeam through a bottle. It refracts into emerald shards, but no glow. You sigh. Magical glow or marketing ploy. Either way should pair nicely with my next TikTok wellness haul. Joke 3 slides out as you pocket a small vial, vowing to test its radiance by lamplight. Nearby, a scribe copies the names of every arriving crew into a ledger bound in fish-skin leather. Ink smudges as droplets of lagoon water splash onto the pages. A quill plunks into an inkwell, and the scribe wipes his brow with a linen rag soaked in gardenia oil. You lean close enough to smell petals and perspiration mingled, a comforting reminder that human touch lingers even in the most regulated spaces. Later, you wander through a lane where disinherited baggage lies piled. Chests of ambergris, barrels of salted herring, silk embroideries. Each item has borne the weight of suspicion, held for weeks before tentative release. A clerk stamps a parcel with a circle cross, symbol D, noting cleared safe. You consider placing a similar mark on your own travel-worn boots, just to prove you've passed quarantine without a sneeze. In that moment, you overhear two officials debating whether quarantine lengths should adjust with seasonality, longer in winter, shorter in summer, or perhaps guided by the cries of seagulls. Historians still argue whether seasonally tailored. Quarantines reduced overall mortality or merely shifted outbreaks into inconvenient months. As dusk approaches, the island's high walls glow gold in dying light. You trace the silhouette of a lone palm tree puppet perched behind battlements, an ornamental curiosity said to have been imported as a symbol of Venice's reach. Fringe. Tales say it once hosted a hidden priest slipping out under its fronds to secretly bless returning ships. You tap the palm's carved trunk, a final reminder that secrets thrive even in sealed-off places. Walking back to the main dock, you note the scent of damp wood, pungent herbs, and distant laughter from afflicted men who huddle by brazier fires. They toss scraps of meat to cats weaving between their legs, And for a moment, the island feels less like a prison and more like a fragile commune bound by fate. You step into a gondola, and the gondolier tips his straw hat in silent salute. Under the moonlight, Venice's quarantines appear not just as grim measures, but as odd rituals, birth pangs of public health that resonate centuries later. You lean back as the boat glides away, feeling the murmur of water fade and the island's silhouette dissolve into mist. In the hush, you catch your breath and consider how the idea of quarantine, born here on these salty shores, shaped our modern, world-linking Venetian merchants to airport screenings and border closures. You exhale, tasting salt and history on your tongue, and realize that containment, like compassion, traces its roots to desperate choices made when civilization teetered on the brink. You drift into a half-lit chapel where the air feels thick with incense and damp stone. Candles gutter along arched alcoves, casting jittery skeleton shadows that dance across frescoed walls. Your footsteps echo like distant drum beats, and you feel a shiver of anticipation. This isn't a regular church. It's a stage for the great danse macabre. You lean forward, tracing the curling lines of bone-white figures leading kings, peasants, and clergymen in a grim procession toward an unseen grave. Every skull stares back as if it knows your secrets, every hollow eye socket a silent invitation to join the march. The danse macabre motif, born soon after the Black Death's first wave, appears in murals across Europe. One of the earliest public examples decorates the Cemetery of the Innocents in Paris around 1424. Mainstream historians agree these macabre tableaux reminded onlookers that death comes for all ranks, from popes trotting beside paupers to merchants waltzing with gravediggers. Historians still argue whether these murals served primarily as moral admonitions or practical public health messages, urging behavioral reforms. You whisper a joke to yourself, talk about Dancing with the Stars. These performers are a real skeleton crew. It's your first joke, lightening the hush. As your eyes adjust, you notice that each skeleton holds a token of its former life: a lute, a chalice, a hoe. One fringe account claims that some artisans actually used real human bones in early danse macabre sculptures, binding them into wooden joints so the figures could sway in chapel breeze. An extreme form of you are what you eat. If you think about it, you wrinkle your nose, imagining a medieval puppet show where the puppets are just hanging out in the attic, reminding you of last night's leftovers. The fresco's vivid colors have faded, but you catch trace hues of vermilion and ochre. They once looked dazzling under torchlight, until the damp seeped in and gnawed at the pigment, much like the plague gnawed at Europe's lifeblood. You run a fingertip along a line where a skeleton scribe points to an open book. Some fringe scholars suggest that the scribe's quill plume was dipped in actual blood from plague victims as a sympathetic ink, believed to transfer disease-warding power onto the page. You can't help quipping your second joke: if blood ink was the rage, I'd hate to see the stationery aisle. Our pens write your will in every sense. Pews are stacked to the side, replaced by wooden benches where townsfolk once gathered to witness this morbid carnival. You imagine a band of minstrels, lutes, fiddles, tambourines, leading the real-time danse macabre during church services, an unwritten health warning in rhythmic steps. One modern aside floats into your mind. This would make for an epic TikTok challenge, though the music licensing rights might require your soul as collateral. The chapel's vaulted ceiling seems to hold countless whispered sermons on vanity, mortality, and the fragile slip between life and afterlife. A plaque near the entrance quotes a local poet's verse: "We're all woven from flesh and fate, alike one stitch undone, and we join the ghostly waltz." Mainstream poets like Johannes von Teppo and Pierre Gringer penned macabre ballads lamenting how quickly life unraveled under plague scythe. You read the lines aloud in a soft whisper, feeling the weight of each syllable settle in your chest. Historians still argue whether these poetic laments were intended as genuine mourning or satirical commentary on human vanities stripped bare by suffering. In a side alcove, you discover a wooden lectern carved with tiny skulls nibbling on rosetta. Peculiar decorative choice. A fringe tale says that villagers wore real rose petals sewn into their sleeves, believing the flower's beauty would distract death's minions for at least a heartbeat. You chuckle softly your third joke, picturing a crowd of plagiaria. Fashionistas, pinning petals like brooches, strutting around as if to say, "Come at me, skeleton boy." Stale incense tickles your nose, mingling with the faint scent of mildew and old stone. You close your eyes and hear a low hum. Pilgrims, chanting a refrain about the universality of decay. Their tonal litany drones on, a lullaby for mortality. In the hush, you recall that crocodile dung sunscreen from Section 4, another desperate attempt to ward off invisible threats. Both ointments and frescoes share the same purpose: facades of protection, whether through repellent, paste, or artful admonition. You step closer to the altar, where a tattered tapestry depicts a skeletal king holding court over living subjects. His crown tilts at a jaunty angle, as though death itself had just finished a particularly good joke. Nearby, you glimpse traces of gold leaf, once lustrous, now flaking off. Fringe rumors claim that impoverished worshippers scraped off tiny gold bits from church icons, believing the scrapings could be ground into powder and sprinkled on food as an elixir. You wipe a speckle of dust from your sleeve, imagining a medieval recipe vlog. Golden plague dust, today's special ingredient for your stew. A traveler's diary note scribbled in Latin rests under glass. I wept at the sight of dancing. Bones, yet found laughter in life's fleeting theater. The diarist recounts attending a mock dance festival in a field outside Basel, where villagers dressed as skeletons paraded around a bonfire, brandishing peppercorn torches, believed to blur plague-carrying fleas' vision. Historians still argue whether these festivals helped communities process grief through dark humor or merely perpetuated superstitious cycles that distracted from real remedies. The chapel's cool stone floor presses against your soles as you stand in the center, heart sinking with the silent choreography around you. You feel drawn into the danse macabre, an unspoken partner in this dance of memory. A modern aside pricks your mind. Imagine a VR simulation of this chapel, but instead of terrifying you, it's got SMR soundscapes of rattling bones and quill scratching. Your pulse flutters at the absurdity and potential. Popularity.you. You lower your gaze to a cracked floor tile engraved with a skeletal foot, eternally poised in mid-step. It's a reminder that no matter how firmly you plant your own feet in daily routine, death can coerce you into a tango at any moment. You whisper the open debate back to yourself. Historians still argue whether the dongs, a macabre framework, primarily educated the public on life's brevity or simply indulged an appetite for spectacle. Soft lantern light shimmers on stained glass windows, though the colored panes show scenes of saintly miracles, not of the dongs. You trace the silhouette of Saint Sebastian, martyr and plague intercessor, arrow-pierced but unbowed. Pilgrims used to press their palms to the glass, leaving greasy prints that local caretakers once tried scrubbing off like prehistoric fingerprints. Fringe gossip claims those greasy palm prints still faintly appear on select nights when the chapel's emptied. Like ghostly check-ins from restless visitors, you lean against a pillar, savoring the hush broken only by the drip of water from a leaky roof. In this cavern of echoes, art speaks in hushed warnings and sly asides. You find solace in the shared humanity across centuries, your laughter at a skeleton's jaunty hat, your empathy for those who sought comfort in cryptic verses and painted bones. Finally, you step back through the chapel doors into a moonlit courtyard scented with jasmine and damp earth. The Dong's macabre mural glows faintly under the night sky, as though the skeletons themselves are bidding you good night. You pull your cloak tighter, feeling the weight of centuries in your chest. In the hush, you imagine the bones tapping out a final farewell. Remember us then, make the most of your dance. You step away from the chapel and wander down a cobblestone street now punctuated by half-empty granaries and vacant weaver stalls. The air smells of overturned earth and fresh timber from hastily built barns. And underfoot, you feel soft patches where fields lay fallow and fences have collapsed. The laborers who once tended the fields have vanished like smoke, and landlords scramble to coax peasants back or risk rotting their own harvests. One mainstream fact stands out. After the Black Death wiped out an estimated 1/3 of Europe's population, labor shortages became so severe that survivors found their work suddenly in higher demand. Historians still argue whether these shortages permanently loosened feudal bonds or simply triggered a vicious cycle of statutes and rebuke. In one village, you see a crowd gathered around a new open-air market. Freshly freed serfs hawk produce at counter prices unthinkable a decade ago. Apple carts lean into the breeze like cheerful picket signs reading wage hike, 10 pence a day. Peasants barter freely, tossing skillful jibes. I'll trade 3 eggs for a day's rest. You grin-side, hustles never looked so tasty. That's your first joke for the section, reminding you that pay raises trump free soup any day. Yet landlords bristle at market chaos. A fringe ordinance emerges. Local lords mandate every surviving peasant plant exactly 12 turnips per acre. No more, no less. Allegedly to appease crop spirits angered by fleas. Some whisper that tenants must bury a scarecrow laden, with sheep bells at each corner, rumored to scare off plague spirits as fiercely as they spook birds from grain. You shake your head, picturing fields dotted with jingling scarecrows. It's the medieval precursor to automated drones, only clunkier and far more folk dance friendly. You trace your fingers along the newly erected manorial writ of repairs, nailed to the oak door of the Lord's manor. The writ sets fixed wage ceilings and bans peasants from migrating for better pay, punishable by whipping and land forfeiture. Mainstream records note that the English Parliament passed the Statute of Labourers in 1351, explicitly to freeze wages at pre-plague levels and rein in rampant inflation. Historians still argue whether this heavy hand drove villagers to revolt or simply accelerated the decline of serfdom, turning into a plowed field. You see oxen plodding behind a single peasant. Once it took 3 field hands to guide them. Now, only one remains. The field's soil is rich and dark, awaiting sowing, but the pace is glacial without extra hands. You stroll past a half-dug irrigation ditch, and modern asides slip into your mind. Imagine calling an Uber for an extra goat and hitting surge pricing on hay. You laugh, joke, too. Seems apt. When your collaborator ghosts you, even oxen start looking like freeloaders. Nearby, craftsmen gather around a half-built guild hall. Their tools, hammers, chisels, looms lie idle as journeymen debate cloth prices. One tailor boasts he charges 2 pennies per sleeve, a striking hike from pre-plague rates. Apprentices are scarce, and masters restrict guild entry with hefty fees. Cupa quips, I can't even get my fingers chopped properly for an apprenticeship oath. Quote. You snort, joining a profession still meant cutting ties, sometimes literally. Historians still argue whether guild restrictions cemented inequality or preserved quality amid desperation. You slip into a cottage where a widow-turned-tenant holds court among families sharing one loom. This communal weaving house buzzes with gossip, mothers comparing ration recipes, children chasing chicken feathers across an earthen floor. She proudly displays a ledger of grain shares, showing more heads than villagers thanks to duplicate entries that doubled her harvest claim. Fringe rumors suggests widows conjured ghost laborers on paper phantom hands that netted extra grain and fueled neighbor envy. You raise an eyebrow. Ghost labor might have been the earliest form of paper profits. As dusk falls, you find an urban square where merchants haggle over parcels of land vacated by departed villagers. Aristocrats pounce, converting plots into fenced sheep pastures, raising wool output, and fueling a medieval textile boom. You recall Section 2's Venetian silk fumigations and sea parallels, whether spices or wool. Commodities carry their own contagion of speculation. If you lean against a carved fountain and quip your third joke, who needs the stock market when you can corner the wool trade in your backyard? Sales of land fueled unprecedented liquidity, and cash became king. Serfs swapped fields for annual rents, and sharecroppers negotiated percentage deals instead of blind tides. Mainstream trends show that by the late 14th century, wage labor replaced traditional dues in many English counties. Historians still argue whether this shift marks capitalism's genesis or merely a temporary adjustment before old hierarchies reasserted themselves. You stroll into the manor's great hall, now half turned into merchant stalls. Under banners of eagles and lions, people trade grain notes and negotiable bills, proto-banking instruments, bridging landholders and traders. One clerk explains that promissory notes emerged to pay wages without sacks of silver jingling in pockets. You nod, thinking medieval finance was the Uber Eats of its time. Rely on paper promises and hope for timely delivery. In a secluded alcove, a traveling accountant calculates rent in bushels of barley, measures of flax, or days of labor. A dizzying mix you wouldn't plug into a modern spreadsheet without risking a meltdown. He scrawls tallies on a wax tablet and offers to forecast yields for 7 groats. You joke, if Excel existed, I bet it would crash on medieval formulas. He chuckles, admitting he's still working on a plugin for goat-leveraged interest. Night brings a hush across farmland in town. Torches flicker by barns where farmers discuss seed choices, share scythes, and negotiate labor pools for harvest. A woman suggests rotating crops with legumes to replenish nitrogen, a practice gleaned from Arab treatises in Section 2's ports. Historians still argue whether Mediterranean influences transformed northern farming or remained localized curiosities. Your path winds past hearth fires, and you feel a pang for Section 5's empty market square. Yet amid devastation you witness innovation, tenant contracts, early cooperatives for horse teams, communal loans for dowries. These grassroots mechanisms laid groundwork for credit systems and proto-capitalist ventures, turning medieval scarcity into entrepreneurial drive. You lean on a weathered fence, inhaling cool night air, scented with fresh compost and smoky bread. Ovens. It strikes you that the Black Death's cruel clearing of human capital paradoxically sparked economic creativity. Survivors claimed higher wages, seized land, and experimented with new contracts. The medieval economy reshaped itself, setting scaffolding of modern capitalism in motion. You wander into a clearing where new shoots of grass push up through churned earth, and the carcasses of old hardships lie buried beneath. A thin mist drifts across thatch-roofed cottages, and the sweet scent of freshly baked rye mingles with the faint tang of smoked fish drying on racks. Children's laughter echoes from a half-repped well, but you notice adults stepping aside when they glimpse your face, your eyes still ringed with the memory of fevered nights. Survivors walk these lanes wearing faded tunics and wary smiles, stepping lightly as though any wrong move might summon another wave of pestilence. You pause before a weathered sign nailed to a post. Here lived those who beat the scourge. Underneath, Names are carved in looping script villagers who survived the plague's first onslaught and returned to rebuild. A mainstream fact: many survivors indeed came back to their homes and fields, sometimes suffering lifelong scars where buboes once bloomed. Historians still argue whether these survivors developed meaningful immunity or remained vulnerable to later outbreaks, their bodies locked in a perpetual negotiation with Yersinia pestis. A woman in a patched apron emerges from a cottage doorway, cradling a bundle of soft-faced lambs. She offers you a slice of seed loaf, its crust crusted with poppy seeds and caraway. You taste the bread's warmth and resilience flavor born of hardship. She tells you quietly that when the plague thundered through here, locals dubbed survivors blessed of God or feared them as bearers of hidden contagion. Some believed survivors carried plague spirit in their blood, able to infect the living by mere touch. You swallow hard, picturing yourself as an unwitting carrier, one handshake too many away from unleashing another nightmare off to your right. A ragtag group gathers around a smoky brazier. A fringe remedy circulates here: villagers' boiled donkey droppings with elderberries and nettle tops, believing the mixture will seal their pores against plague vapors. You wrinkle your nose at the description. Donkey dung tea might have been as effective as unicorn horn dust, which, by the way, also shows up in some hedged doctor ledgers. Do you joke to yourself, I'd steal a sip of that if I ever run out? Of pumpkin spice latte, inserting a modern aside that tastes oddly right in this rustic scene. That's your first joke, tickling the moment with absurdity. Children dart through the square, trailing ribbons of knotted garlic bulbs and wild marjoram herb, believed to ward off unseen foes. You recall the onion garlands of Section 2 and wonder if garlic strings truly turned back fleas or merely kept villagers munching snacks throughout the day. Historians still argue whether aromatic defenses had any real effect on plague mortality or simply offered psychological comfort when no cure existed. A stooped elder sits by a walled fountain, dipping her slender fingers into the flow and flicking droplets onto her forehead. She claims these waters have been blessed by survivors who hosed down their homes with vinegar and ruined other odd folk cure from Section 5's Market Square. The water's faint minty Thames cools your skin. You bend closer to drink, but she cautions, better to catch fish than plague in this well. Joke 2 bubbles up. If only bottled water came with plague-proof certification. Off the main path, a small shrine stands beneath a linden tree, draped in faded ribbons and stuffed with yellowed love letters. Locals whisper that survivors once left tokens here to thank St. Roch for sparing them. A fringe tale tells of one seamstress sewing pieces of her own cloth-shrouded buboes into a doll, believing that as the doll decayed, so would any lingering infection in her body. Do you imagine a burial rite craft fair? Knitted plague, puppets 100% biodegradable. Twilight settles. You approach a low stone hearth where a handful of survivors convene. They each bear a small leather pouch at their waist inside, a pinch of graveyard earth taken from their family tombs. The earth is meant to anchor lingering spirits so they cannot wander and sow fresh death. They pass the pouches around, letting everyone inhale the musty scent. The ritual is silent, but you feel its gravity, a collective trust placed in the soil that once consumed loved ones. One survivor, a former blacksmith, runs a hand over a fresh scar on his forearm, tells you he used to hammer horseshoes till the plague arrived. Afterward, he sealed the wound with a paste of powdered goat horn and onion sand, odd paste that bubbled its way into legend in nearby villages. You press your palm to his arm. The skin feels warm and surprisingly untainted. He smiles wryly and murmurs, "Never trust a cure that bubbles like porridge." You can't help quipping your third joke. What's bubbling? The apocalypse? Evidently. They tell you the village now reshapes itself around survivor status. Those who endured the plague often inherit vacated plots of land, as neighbors moved away or perished. Others face suspicion. A miller's wife was turned away from her own home when villagers feared her touch might sour the grain. Historians still argue whether this social rebirth hardened new hierarchies, praising survivors as heroes or demonizing them as plague witches. Above you, the moon peeks through drifting clouds, painting silver paths across the ground. You follow those luminous threads to a weeping willow, where survivors convene every full moon to share tales of survival and sorrow. Their voices merge into a low hum, grief transformed into solidarity. In that hush, you sense that prejudice, like plague, can lurk unseen until the right conditions let it bloom. A young mother approaches, carrying a green gourd carved into a hollow mask. She warns you to wear it as protection when you sleep. Inside, she's placed dried chamomile, thyme, and a single vial of vinegar scented with rosemary. She asks for nothing in return but your company for a moment, sharing how the mask soothed her nightmares of spinning bodies and tolling bells. You slip the mask on, feeling the cool gourd press against your cheeks. It's oddly comforting, like wearing a tiny pumpkin over your face. As you wander back toward the main lane, you recall the quarantines from Section 7 and the flagellant fervor of Section 6. Here, life limps forward on wounded feet and hopeful hearts. Survivors and scapegoats walk side by side, each carrying burdens of fear and faith. You inhale the night air, tasting smoke, bread, and the faintest hint of hope. Somewhere beyond the mist, church bells toll once more, a gentle reminder that healing, like plague, travels at its own pace. You pause at the crossroads and listen. The village exhales a quiet lullaby of rustling leaves, murmured prayers, and the soft click of leather on cobblestones. In this fragile moment, you realize that prejudice can be as contagious as disease, and only by sharing remedies, stories, and laughter can communities knit themselves whole again. You set off down the moonlit path, stepping into a world still healing from its scars, where every survivor's story becomes another stitch in the tapestry of resilience. You follow a narrow dirt track winding past rows of simple wooden crosses, each marking where lives once flickered out too soon. A wind stirs golden stalks of grain in the fields beyond, brushing against your ankles like gentle reminders that life stubbornly persists despite everything. You pause beneath a gnarled oak, its twisted roots exposed by gravediggers who carved mass pits into this hillside. Above you, clouds gather in lazy spirals, casting dappled shade on monuments of mud and wood. As you tread softly among these markers, you confront a question that haunts every whisper about the Black Death. Exactly how many souls did it claim? Mainstream estimates hold that the pandemic wiped out roughly 1/3 of Europe's population between 1347 and 1351, reducing perhaps 75 million people to around 50 million. Some regions, like Florence, lost over half their inhabitants within months. Historians still argue whether those figures reflect local extremes or if entire continents varied wildly in mortality. You imagine town clerks furiously tallying names in parish registers, ink smudging from tears as they tried to keep pace with funerals. Yet not all numbers line up neatly. Modern researchers pore over wills, tax rolls, hearth counts, and archaeological digs sex-huming skeletons to measure age, health, and death rates. One fringe theory suggests that some villages deliberately undercounted burials to avoid onerous levies on surviving households, effectively hiding dead bodies in unmarked pits. You can almost see bespectacled clerks whispering behind ledger screens, "Let's only list every third grave. That way, the tithe stays low." It's as if medieval administrators invented a kind of plague-era GDP or destroy the data you don't want case and hope no one notices. You lean against the oaks. Rough bark and crack a smile joke, one for this stretch. If only they'd had pivot tables back then. Counting deaths would have been a snap. Literally. Yet you know the reality was messier. Surveys based on hearth tax returns, sometimes, differ by tens of percentage points from pollen and tree-earing data that hint at collapsed land use. Historians still argue whether demographic evidence from rural parishes or urban burial grounds gives a truer picture of the carnage. And both methods carry biases, like reading a horror novel from just one page. A soft breeze carries the faint scent of rosemary and burnt tinder. The same aroma you traced in Section 5's abandoned market square and Section 6's torchlit, flagellant processions. Catch yourself recalling the onion garlands from Section 2 and the sulfur smoke of Section 7's lazarettos, as if each odd folk remedy left its scent on posterity. In a way, the smell of counting casualties clings to both science and superstition, methods that ranged from systematic to downright macabre. You stand before a cluster of new graves, their edges marked by fresh wood and scribbled names. Local. Elders point out how some plots hold 5 bodies in one trench, while others have empty spaces supposedly reserved for the next victim. Rumor has it that superstition led to ready graves dug in advance, hollows kept open like empty pews awaiting mourners. A fringe account even claims that one enterprising sexton rented out these prepared pits, charging families extra for a pre-dug grave. It's your second joke. Medieval on-demand burial services guaranteed open casket spacing. Beyond that gallows humor, you ponder the global scope. Outside Europe, outbreaks raged across North Africa, the Middle East, and parts of Asia, but records are patchy. Some scholars calculate death tolls up to 200 million people worldwide, while others argue the figure might be closer to 75 million total, given unrecorded rural losses. Historians still argue whether the Asian epidemics of the 1330s and 1460s should be lumped together or treated as distinct events, an endless academic seesaw of inclusion and exclusion. A crow lands on one of the wooden crosses, ruffling its black feathers and eyeing the ground below as if counting croaking steps. You shiver at the bird's presence, nature's tallyman perched among the dead. Medieval lore sometimes depicted crows as guardians of cemeteries, their calls thought to ward off scavengers. But you've heard a fringe whisper that in some villages, people believed crows actually collected names, then fed them to underworld deities in exchange for safe passage. Doesn't seem any saner than crocodile dung sunscreen, right? You trace? Initials carved into a nearby plank. AB 1348. Each letter a testament to someone who lived long enough to be remembered. Yet the names fade with time, and the total count whether 30%, 50%, or more blurs into collective memory. Modern historians debate whether relying on parish registers, which began in earnest only in the 1530s in many places, skews our view of earlier losses. It's like trying to map a forest by counting only saplings. Stepping off the dirt path, you examine a small memorial plaque installed centuries later by a local philanthropist. It proclaims that 200 villagers perished here in the Great Mortality. But tax records from nearby towns only list 45 names. If you let your eyes follow the discrepancy like a detective, weighing the plaque's grand pronouncement against archival humility. Jokes aside, it's unsettling how hard it is to know death's true scale when memory, politics, and record-keeping conspire to muddy the waters. You shut your eyes and inhale. The wind sighs through broken tombstones, whispering arguments between scholars who can't agree on the ratio of bubonic to pneumonic cases. Some claim that up to 25% of deaths were from the pneumonic form, spreads more rapidly but leaves fewer archaeological traces. Others insist those numbers derive from isolated outbreaks, not the continental surge. Historians still argue whether the septicemic variants always. The underdog in plague studies played a bigger role in remote regions. It's a debate as lively as any tavern brawl, but with bloodier stakes. Opening your eyes, you notice that the crosses cast long shadows across the tilled earth. Each silhouette stretches toward tomorrow, hinting at lives that might have been. You recall Section 9's bleached sheep pastures and Section 10's survivor gatherings, that after death's harvest comes a semblance of rebirth. Yet counting the dead remains a fraught act. Too high a tally can resurrect terror. Too low can downplay resilience. You kneel and brush dust off a simple wooden marker. Beneath it, you find a coin dated 1349, scuffed by boot prints. Someone pressed it into soft pine before burial, perhaps as an offering for the ferryman to carry their soul. The gesture reminds you that even in death, people seek to control outcomes, be it through coins, charms, or census lines. You pocket the coin as a talisman of uncertain history. Rising, you resume your walk down the hill, mindful that each step travels through a field of contested numbers. The valley below glows in late daylight, crops waving like a living tribute to those counted and uncounted. You stumble on a half-year-woaded stone slab, its inscription illegible, but for one word. Remember, it's a final callback to Section 8's Danse Macabre's universal invitation and to every odd remedy and ritual you've encountered. In the hush, before dusk, you sense that the true lesson lies not in pinpointing a precise figure, but in honoring the stories behind the statistics. Historians still argue whether obsessing over exact death tolls distracts from understanding the broader social, economic, and cultural transformations the Black Death ignited. Perhaps that debate is itself a mark of how plagues shape not only bodies but also our collective memory. You inhale deeply, tasting the earth's faint sweetness beneath the stench of loss. It's a reminder that life and death dance on the same stage, and sometimes the hardest count is the one that measures human tenacity rather than sheer numbers. You step into a mist-laden grove, where ancient oaks stand like silent sentinels, their gnarled limbs dripping with dew and echoing the hush of centuries. Underfoot, moss cushions your steps, and the air tastes faintly of peat and pine resin. You brush your fingertips across a weathered plank nailed to a tree edge, with radial markings that match triang samples used by modern scientists to reconstruct medieval climate patterns. Mainstream dendrochronology shows a series of unusually wet summers and cold winters in the early 14th century, culminating in the Great Famine of 1315 to 1317, which weakened populations and likely drove rodents to seek food closer to human settlements. Historians still argue whether these climate shocks primed Europe for plague's arrival or simply coincided with other critical factors. A chill wind rustles through the canopy, carrying the echo of Section 1's dusty Mongol outpost and Section 2's sea breezes at calf, reminders that nature and human networks intertwine to spread both commerce and catastrophe. You inhale deeply, tasting rain-soaked earth and something faintly metallic, like distant promises of bloodshed. Beneath your feet, the moss bristles with spores, teeny time capsules of environmental data. Ice core records from Greenland reveal spikes in atmospheric dust and sulfur, hinting at volcanic eruptions around the same era. Some fringe climate sleuths claim that ash clouds dimmed sunlight enough to suppress cereal crops and, oddly, force plague-carrying rodents into new migratory routes. You picture plague-bearing rats hitching rides on ash-laden branches, nature's version of must-have carry-on. As you follow a winding path, you pause beside a shallow stream where researchers once extracted sediment cores. Layers of pollen, charcoal, and mineral deposits tell a story of deforestation and shifting land use signs that medieval communities were already altering ecosystems before the Black Death struck. Modern asides flutter through your mind. These researchers are like medieval detectives, sifting through mud instead of manuscripts. You quip your first joke. Imagine telling your friends you spent summer vacations playing in sludge pits to map a plague's arrival. Further along, a wooden lectern holds a replica of a 2018 genome sequencing chart detailing Yersinia pestis strains recovered from East Smithfield plague burials in London. You trace the lines connecting ancient DNA samples to modern reference genomes. Mainstream genomics indicates that the Black Death strain shares a common ancestor with later plague outbreaks up to the 18th century, suggesting remarkable bacterial stability over 400 years. Historians still argue whether this stability implies a single source introduction in the 1340s or multiple incursions from Central Caucasian reservoirs. The lectern is flanked by 2 obsidian mirrors and oddly fringe installation. Local legend says these mirrors were gifts from a hermit alchemist who claimed the reflections could reveal plague spirits lurking in the corner of your vision. You peer into one and see only your tired face and a faint mist curling at the edge of the glass. You wink at the absurdity second joke. If alchemists could spot plague demons, my mirror would be haunted by overdue bills and low battery warnings instead. Beyond the mirrors, an interpretive panel quotes I-score specialist Dr. Ingrid Falk's apocryphal remark. We found black carbon deposits in 1345 that rival those of Krakatoa's eruption. Some fringe commentators stretch that into a theory of volcanic trigger for mass rodent migrations feeding flea populations. You inhale again, valuing crisp air over volcanic ash. Yet the panel reminds you that climate and plague are entwined. Punctuated volcanic winters, relentless rains, and famines created ecological opportunities, both for rodents, for human desperation. You wander down to a small amphitheater, where a soil scientist displays a box of chitin fragments, flea exoskeleton remnants unearthed in plague pits from Section 11's burial grounds. Under a microscope, you see plates and hairs that testify to the minute armies that did the real work of transmission. She tells you that sediment DNA sampling recovered both Yersinia pestis and ancient rodent DNA, providing a double stamp of origin. Historians still argue whether flea survival in saturated soils required the bacterium to evolve heat shock proteins or if simple microniches in human dwellings sufficed. In the amphitheater's quiet, you recall Section 6's flagellant crowds, swathed in ritual smoke, and Section 7's quarantined Venetian islands encircled by fumigation fires. Now you consider whether climate proxies like tree rings and ice cores tell a clearer tale than medieval chronicles laden with miasma theories. You lean back on a carved bench and joke your third joke. Who needs gossiping monks when you've got tree rings spilling all the tea? A bench-mounted display shows sequences of single nucleotide polymorphisms (SNPs) that distinguish the 1347 to 1351 strain from later 17th century variants. Beneath each chart is a slender vial labeled with the excavation site London, Barcelona, Tana in the Crimea. A fringe hypothesis suggests that plague's genetic differences mirror the route of the Silk Road. The further east a strain is found, the more exotic its SNP profile. You prod the vial and muse whether modern travel ban debates would see similar arguments applied. Ban all boots from Asia. Your gaze drifts upward to the rustling canopy again, where birds flit between branches heavy with catcons. Pollen traps deployed in the southern Alps show declines in certain tree species after the mid-14th century. It's echoing human depopulation and reforestation in abandoned fields. You close your eyes and hear faint hymns from Section 8's dongs. Macabre chapel, as if art's dark reflections merge with nature's shifting fabric. It strikes you that tree rings chart the rhythm of human decline. Growth rings marking eras of plenty and collapse. A final kiosk invites you to weigh in on an ongoing debate. Was climate the primary spark for plague's leap into pandemic? Did human networks of trade and warfare dominate the narrative? A touchscreen displays two tallies, climate primacy versus human agency, and you slide a digital chip toward, both factors intertwined. Historians still argue whether one argument outweighs the other, but most concede that climate, ecology, and human behavior formed a deadly triangle as you leave the grove. The mist lifts, and you step into golden afternoon light. The oaks recede behind you as you follow a mossy path that leads back toward familiar landmarks. The quarantined docks of Section 7, the silent flagellant fields of Section 6, and the skeletal dance of Section 8's murals. You breathe in the deep, damp air one last time, tasting peat and possibility. You realize that climate clues and genetics have rewritten much of what we thought we knew, yet open debates persist. Keeping the narrative alive. You wipe a smear of moss off your boot, imagining medieval peasants tracing their own climatic data in rain-slicked fields. They couldn't sequence DNA or drill ice cores, but they felt the chill of cold rains, saw crops fail, and watched rats abandon burrows for human sheds. Their lived experience echoes in these scientific proxies, a reminder that history and nature share the same fossil record in the hush of the closing grove. You let your senses settle, the soft thud of damp leaves underfoot, the distant hum of insects emerging in waning warmth, and the faint echo of wind through the branches. You sense that the story of plague, like the rings of these trees, is concentric, a series of living memory layers, each marking a season of human and environmental change. As you step onto firm ground again, you carry both data and doubt, knowing that every climate clue and genome sequence adds pieces to a puzzle historians will debate for generations to come. You slip into a dimly lit chamber hidden behind a crumbling city wall, where torchlight quivers across damp stone and the air carries a faint metallic temps, as if someone spilled blood on iron. Scrolls and pamphlets, each more tattered than the last, lie strewn across a warped oak table. You brush away a layer of dust to reveal a crude map marking plague launch sites and dotted with cryptic runes. Somewhere in the back of your mind, you recall the Mongol catapult from Section to only hear rumor amplifies that hurling corpses was less a siege tactic and more an early form of biowarfare. Mainstream historians note that during the 1346 siege of Kaffa, Mongol forces did launch infected bodies into the city, potentially infecting defenders. But they still argue whether this tactic truly sparked the pandemic beyond local bounds. Your fingers graze an upside-down wooden crucifix, and you smell the lingering whiff of candle wax mixed with clove standard fumigation from Section 7's quarantines. But here it feels malicious, like a ritual gone dark. A fringe manuscript tucked beneath ancient ledger pages claims that secret alchemists experimented with retin-fused potions, bottling Yersinia pestis in vials marked elixir of empire to unleash on rival kingdoms. You trace the label with your nail and nearly wince. Imagine your fantasy tabletop RPG session. Pivoting to medieval chemical warfare, players cower as the DM rolls plague dice. You suppress a giggle joke, one for this section, and wonder if anyone's pitched a plague expansion pack. Tapping on a brittle parchment. You find sketches of winged saucer shapes above plague pits, accompanied by cryptic ciphers. One fringe enthusiast posits that extraterrestrials seeded Earth with the plague organism to cull populations and study human resilience, an alien anthropology project with deadly side effects. You're torn between incredulity and admiration for creative thinking. Historians still argue whether such theories gain traction because they offer convenient scapegoats or simply reflect our fascination with cosmic horror. When earthly explanations fall short, Low Shelf holds jars of dried spider legs and powdered mummy wrappings allegedly used in secret societies' plague rituals. You uncork one jar and the scent of must overwhelms you, like old library shelves left too damp. A modern aside flits through your mind. Does this count as the medieval equivalent of vaping inhale? Enough dust and you'll die. But at least you'll die looking edgy. You chuckled joked wand, carefully replace the lid, mindful that you don't want a cloud of mummified fiber snapping at your throat. Leaning closer, you notice a ledger tracking royal inoculations, entries of courtiers receiving low-grade exposures by friendly fleas, spread via controlled rat bites. Mainstream chronicles mention that some Italian nobility deliberately sought bubonic survivors' blood to build immunity. But they still argue whether these primitive inoculations provided real protection or just expedited aristocratic demise. You imagine a Tudor version of a vaccine clinic? Step right up for your dose of plague fag, no needles, just fleas. The image makes you snort, adding levity to the macabre. A tattered banner hangs above the table, featuring a double-headed eagle clutching a beaker dripping black ichor. Under it, a faded motto reads, "Through pestilence, power." Conspiracy theorists claim this symbol belonged to an ancient brotherhood of plague merchants, trading bacterial stock like commodity futures. They whispered that secret meetings convened in catacombs beneath Paris, where bankers and heads of state plotted population control. Historians still argue whether any such clandestine group existed, or if it's merely a product of sensationalist forgeries. Penned centuries later, you run a hand along the table's edge and feel sticky residue stain of old spilt ink, or something more sinister. You can't tell. On the wall, a wax mask mounted like a macabre trophy resembles the gourd mask from Section 10. But this version is inscribed with arcane symbols. Fringe lore holds that wearing it during full moons allowed practitioners to command plague spirits and bend mortality to their will. You imagine late-night YouTube tutorials, master the spell of the moldy gourd, complete with neon title cards. You grin at the absurdity joke threeond, step back before you're tempted to overlay it with neon filters at the corner of the chamber. A battered chest labeled Testimonia Veritas creaks as you lift its lid. Inside, depositions of plague witches accuse midwives, healers, and traveling minstrels of colluding with invisible forces to spread disease. One accusation reads that a wandering musician in Provence sang a cursed lullaby into infants' ears, lacing each verse with Yersinia spores. You shudder, recalling how forced confessions were often extracted under duress, still argue whether these trials reflected real threats or served as scapegoating rituals that amplified communal paranoia instead of solving actual disease vectors. You pocket a faded confession transcript and note the scribe's trembling hand at the edge of the page. The margins hold doodles of plump rats wearing crowns and unsettling cartoonish mockery, suggesting the rodent monarchy of plague's underworld. You imagine memeing these rats into medieval social media hashtag crowned rats, trending in 1349. The thought tickles you. Joke 4 before you slide the transcript back into its dusty coffin. Stepping toward the doorway, you pause by an iron-bound chest branded with the emblem of a grieving raven. It hums with an almost electrical buzz. Rumor claims that chest held early plague toxins sealed under PayPal Decrean Ecclesiastical, bioweapon locked away to prevent misuse. You find yourself wondering if any pope really wrestled with the temptation to unleash plague on an excommunicated enemy. Historians still argue whether medieval leaders recognized the bacterium's true nature or simply treated it as divine. Miasma beyond any mortal's control. A single candle guttering on a side table catches your gaze. Its flame dances, casting giant rat-shaped shadows that leap across the ceiling. You feel a whisper of wind, or is it the draft of unseen wings? A fringe theory drifts into your mind. Some claim plague reached Europe via meteorite fragments carrying extraterrestrial microbes in cosmic dust. It's like nature's deadliest Easter egg, delivered on a celestial scoreboard. And you snort joke. 5. Imagining a plague-themed arcade game. Space rats versus medieval townsfolk. With mini-bosses like Count von Bubonic, you lean back, letting the fizz of these conspiracies settle. The chamber's gloom feels alive, as if the stone itself harbors secrets best left undisturbed. You run your tongue along your dry lips and catch the faint aftertaste of iron reminder of your own mortality and the countless lives whispered away in hidden scripts like these. Before you exit, you skim a final note penned in a shaky hand. The Black Death was a test run for something greater. It trails off into a swirl of ink, the last line indecipherable. You pause and let that notion hang in the torchlight. Historians still argue whether early observers glimpsed real clandestine machinations or simply filled gaps in understanding. With sensational conjecture, stepping out of the chamber, you feel the cool night air wash over you, carrying distant echoes of church bells and the hum of nocturnal insects. You pull your cloak tighter, senses heightened by secrets half revealed and tales half believed. Outside, the world seems unchanged: cobbled streets, shuttered windows, lanterns glowing against the dark. Yet you carry new shadows in your mind, conspiratorial shapes that flicker at the edge of reason. The plague may have ravaged bodies, but it also released a flood of whispered secrets, urban legends, and cosmic theories that refuse to die. Historians still argue whether such stories merely distract from the real microbial menace or reflect deeper human need to find purpose in catastrophe. You glance back at the chamber door as if expecting it to close on its own, but it stands open, an invitation for the next daring soul to sift through these whispers. With a final breath, you step away, leaving the conspiracies behind, but carrying their specter with each echoing footstep into the uncertain night. You step out of your home office, walls plastered with sticky notes and the hum of your laptop echoing like a digital chant, and into a street framed by masked pedestrians pacing 6 feet apart. The faint tang of hand sanitizer clings to the proceed air like medieval miasma of fumigations, reminding you of those sulfurous braziers on Venice's quarantine island. Your phone buzzes. Global COVID-19 cases have topped 100 million by early 2021, a grim milestone no one celebrated. You pause and wonder if endless alerts fuel helpful vigilance or just stoke chronic ease. Historians still argue whether this digital bombardment strengthens public health or deepens collective panic. Neighborly chatter drifts from balconies, snippets of Zoom fatigue, debates over mask styles, and the latest TikTok dance trend that somehow lifted spirits more reliably than any prescription. You recall the Dong's macabre murals from Section 8, where skeletons paraded nobles and paupers alike, and you muse that today's dance challenges feel like a virtual iteration of that same dark humor, only today's skeletons are emoji masks on faces you can barely see. Joke 1 bubbles up. If viral TikToks cured plagues, we'd have banished Yersinia pestis with a 15-second shuffle as you round a corner. Spray-painted slogans decorate boarded-up storefronts, flatten the curve. Alongside pandemic, some conspiracy theorists insist COVID was seeded by 5G towers or clandestine labs, a modern echo of the Kafka catapults flinging corpses in Section 2. Fringe belief holds that wearing a copper amulet charged by UV lights wards off the virus. Imagine medieval knights swapping chainmail for copper necklaces to repel miasma. You smirk, reminded that desperate times still birth outlandish remedies. Just now they're sold in online wellness stores rather than at village apothecaries. You enter a community testing center set up in a school gym. Plexiglass dividers glint under fluorescent lights. Volunteers in full PPE guide cars through drive-in swabbing stations where nasal probes tickle like microscopic flagellants from Section 6. Mainstream practice by late 2020 saw over 7 million daily COVID tests in the U.S. alone, a scale of screening unfathomable in medieval times. Yet you can't shake the sense that mass testing, like medieval quarantine, offers both real protection and false reassurance. Historians still argue whether widespread asymptomatic testing truly curbed infection. Spikes or primarily fueled reporting metrics without reducing hospitalizations. Your test done. You wander past a row of parked cars where each trunk holds a stash of cranky toddlers and sourdough starters in equal measure. The quarantine hobby trend has turned living rooms into pottery studios, cocktail bars, and fermentation labs. You recall the garlic garlands from Section 10 and the rue bundles from Section 6, quirky talismans for safety. Today's equivalents are kombucha kits priced at boutique brew levels or Himalayan salt lamps promising ionic purifying powers. Joke 2 drifts in. If charging crystals with Himalayan vibes repelled fleas, perhaps they'd have saved half of Florence back in 1348. You duck into a local cafe offering contactless coffee. Your barista's voice is muffled behind a surgical mask as they place your latte on a sanitized tray outdoors. The aroma of steamed milk nearly masks the faint hint of disinfectant. You think of those crocodile dung sunscreens from Section 4 medieval skincare extremities and appreciate that at least modern cafe hazards don't smell like extinct reptile poop. Your latte's foam sports a dainty heart. You thank the barista silently and wander to a picnic table, pulling out your laptop once more. On screen, you scroll news of phased vaccine rollouts, millions receiving mRNA doses heralded as scientific miracles. Mainstream accounts laud the 95% efficacy rates of some vaccines in clinical trials. Still, pockets of vaccine hesitancy form echo chambers echoing plague witch hunts of old, where survivors in Section 10 faced suspicion rather than celebration. Historians still argue whether early anti-vaccine movements, mere medieval scapegoating, or represent a distinct mistrust born of modern politics. Across from you, small group debates mask mandates like town councils regulating garlic strewn doorways in Section 2. One friend insists cloth masks suffice. Another demands N95s, calling them plague doctor chic. Fringe TikTok clinicians promote gargling bleach or inhaling steamy showers as cures or remedies as dubious as fig and spiderweb poultices. You sip your latte, thinking bleach gargles sound like a medieval liver-cleansing enema gone wrong. Joke 3 finally surfaces. Next, up preemptive bleach foot baths to stop foodborne transmission. You glance at a mural on a plywood. Panelan artists tribute to healthcare workers as guardian angels battling microscopic demons. It feels like a modern Danse Macabre, where doctors in scrubs lead marching lines of masked children. The mural skeletons have been replaced by stethoscopes and scrub caps, a vivid callback to Section 8's skeletal dance. The message is clear. In every age, communities use art to process collective trauma. As dusk falls, you witness rolling curfews enforced by police cars idling at intersections. The klaxon of a loudspeaker orders residents indoors, reminiscent of Venetian quarantine watchmen in Section 7. You ponder whether modern civil enforcement of health orders infringes personal liberty, more or less than medieval city-state decrees sealing off entire islands. Historians still argue whether public compliance with top-down mandates yields better outcomes than grassroots community self-regulation. You return home under amber streetlights, passing a community garden where volunteers distribute free masks. Alongside fresh produce, gesture-blending medieval almsgiving from Section 5 with 21st century public health goodwill. You pause, inhaling the night air tinted with basil and disinfectant. Somewhere in that mix lies the promise that humanity, even amid terror, will share scant resources and genuine care. Once inside, you kick off your shoes, wash your hands in the sink behind a holographic reminder to scrub for 20 seconds. Modern hand-washing protocols far more scientific than medieval vinegar and moss concoctions. You settle into your favorite chair, wrap yourself in a soft blanket that hums with embedded heating wires, a far cry from plague victims shivering beneath wool blankets. In Section 3, the ambient hum of your electric fan offers a 21st century ASMR lullaby. You lean back and cradle your mug, tasting cinnamon and steamed milk. The day's echoes, quarantine lines, artful murals, vaccine debates blend into a lullaby of human resilience. You remember that medieval travelers wore rue, sprigs, and garlic garlands, while you sport a tiny chip in your arm certifying your vaccine status. Both rituals mark communal boundaries between safety and exposure. Faith and fear in the glowing screen's reflection. You glimpse your own face mask dangling by your side, an emblem of solidarity and sacrifice. You whisper to yourself, we've come far from rodent-ridden caravans. But our responses remain bound by the same dance between science, ritual, and social cohesion. Historians still argue whether modern pandemics reflect progress or simply new renditions of age-old panics. You finish your latte, placing the mug on a coaster beside a half-written journal entry about today's strange comforts and lingering anxieties. Outside, the hum of a street sweeper rumbles past, another form of sanitation replacing medieval fumigation fires. You close your eyes and let the modern night settle, heart steady in its vaulted chest. The world may rewind its anxieties in familiar patterns, but each generation rewrites its own survival story. You stand on the lip of a gentle hill as first light spills over dew-wet grass, the world humming softly beneath your feet. The air tastes of warmed earth and new beginnings, laced with the faintest hint of lavender from those dried bundles you tucked into your cloak back in Section 10. The meadow before you was once a mass burial ground. Now it's a patchwork of wildflowers where bees dart like living flecks of gold. In this transformed landscape, you feel the pulse of resilience coursing through every blossom and blade, reminding you that life persists even after history's darkest night. You recall how in Section 11 the chalk crosses marked graves of unknown souls. And think how today tombstones read names with dates stretching centuries beyond the Black Death's grim reckoning. Mainstream historians note that by the early 16th century, Europe's population had nearly rebounded to pre-plague levels, a slow phoenix rise across generations. Historians still argue whether the recovery owed more to high birth rates or improved agricultural techniques that emerged from labor shortages. Either way, the sheer act of planting fields and raising families became an act of defiance against death's ancient claim. A gentle breeze nudges you forward, carrying the scent of freshly baked bread from a nearby village bakery. The strains of a lute coing the Danse Macabre's morbid cadence from Section 8 drift on the wind, now turned into a lilting folk melody celebrating harvest rather than lamenting mortality. You chuckle at the thought. Medieval skeletons would be horrified, but today's tune breathes hope into every note. Joke 1 flutters through your mind. If bones could dance again, I bet they'd boogie to a beat of freshly milled barley. Trace a finger across the knotted wood of a marker inscribed with Renewal 1405, recalling how villagers once tethered onions and garlic 2 doors in Section 2 and now hang flowering vines for simple beauty. A fringe custom persists here every spring. Locals tie ribbons around an ancient oak where survivors once gathered, believing the tree absorbed their courage and now shares it back. You step closer, feeling the bark's warmth and wondering if the oak's rings hold secret records of sweating shamans and onion-garlanded doorways. Historians still argue whether such living monuments served as genuine communal anchors or fanciful folk. Nostalgia, the meadow's hum swells as honeybees drift in search of clover. A callback to those plague bees from Section 5's Market Square ones. Blamed for carrying disease, now heralds of pollination and plenty. You close your eyes and inhale, tasting sweetness. Strikes you how something so small can shift the fate of entire fields. Just as a single flea once altered the course of continents. Joke 2 surfaces. Talk about small-scale drama these. Bees do more for life than a battalion of barber surgeons ever did. You wander toward a low wooden fence where vines of hop plants twist around rails. Symbols of beer halls reopened after centuries of silence. Villagers gather under arcades nearby, sharing ale brewed with fresh hops, a modern spin on the ancient belief that fermented drinks could purify water. You sip a mug and feel carbonation prickle your tongue, a bubbly salute to human ingenuity. Mainstream accounts show medieval brewers refine techniques post-plague, using cleaner wells and new yeast strains, boosting both flavor and safety. Historians still argue whether beer's lowered alcohol content or its boiled mash offered more protection against waterborne illnesses. And academic quarrel bubbles like yeast in a vat as you stroll deeper. A chorus of children's laughter echoes from a meadow playground hung with colorful cloth, echoing Section 6's flagellant processions, now replaced with carefree games that mimic no penitential dance. A group of youths chase a leather ball, collars streaked with field dirt and giggles. You grin, realizing that play itself is a balm for collective trauma, stitching hearts back together, one laugh at a time. Joke 3 drifts in. If laughter is the best medicine, these kids might have cured the plague on their own. Ahead, an old stone well stands, decorated with wildflowers, once a desperate source of vinegar-soaked rags in Section 3. Now a sparkling font where villagers draw cool water. Elder neighbors dip their vessels and share news of weddings, newborns, and market days, proof that communal ties reignite themselves stronger than before. A grass-weaving workshop near the well teaches young artisans a craft nearly lost after labor shortages in Section 9. Now baskets line doorsteps, sturdy symbols of interdependence. Historians still argue whether medieval guilds rebounded post-plague by welcoming new members or reasserted gatekeeping to preserve quality. Either way, craftsmanship lives on in each woven reed. You climb a wooden platform beside a small stage, where a storyteller pours tea for an audience seated on mossy logs. The tea's aroma mingles with thyme and rose petals, an homage to all the rosewater, lozenges, and herbal poultices you encountered earlier. She opens her book of local legends and recounts tales of survivors who once deemed blessed or cursed in Section 10. You settle into a bench, savoring each syllable as if it were honey, feeling that narrative itself forms a vital cure for collective amnesia. Above you, starlings wheel in dusk skies, forming shifting patterns like living constellations. You recall the cosmic whispers of Section 13's alien plague theories and smile at how the unknown still fascinates us. Whether we seek extraterrestrial scapegoats or microbial truths, tonight the real mystery is how communities rebuild memory and meaning from ruins. Historians still argue whether cultural renewal after mass trauma arises organically or needs deliberate, artful rituals to flourish. You rise from your seat, brushing stray straw from your robes, and let the meadow's hush settle around you like a soft blanket. The distant echo of church bells tolls for a village festival once muted in fear, now ringing in reunion. You close your eyes, palms warming against the wood railing, can feel the cyclical heartbeat of human perseverance guiding you home. Ahead, lamplit windows glow in cottage walls, silent invitations to supper tables laden with bread and cheese, laughter and conversation. Somewhere inside, someone will recall how ancestors once feared marmots in dusty steppes, only to find hope in bees, trees, and community. You pick your way down the slope, senses attuned to the faint hum of cicadas joining the chapel choir. Final callback to Section 8's Danse Macabre, reframed as an ode to life, as you step into the lamplit path. You sense that resilience isn't a flash in the pan, but a slow dawn breaking across horizons of uncertainty. The soft whir of life carrying on, bees in bloom, children at play, dancers weaving stories becomes your evening lullaby. You inhale one last breath of meadow air, sweet with blooms and possibility, ready to carry this final whisper out into the world. The night air settles around you like a gentle sigh. Every breath a soft exhale that carries away tension and unrest. Stars sprinkle the velvet sky, distant and constant, offering quiet reassurance that time's steady march outlasts any momentary darkness. You lie back on a patch of warm grass, each blade cradling you as if nature itself tucks you in, and listen to the meadow's gentle orchestra, a cricket's tremolo, an owl's distant call, the whisper of leaves in a mild breeze. There is no hurry here, only the slow unfurling of calm in this hushed space. Memories of fevered wards and shuttered marketplaces fade like embers cooling at dawn. Instead, you feel the lingering warmth of communal hands, the baker passing seed loaf from Section 10, the apothecary's careful pour of lavender oil in Section 7, and the storyteller's honeyed words under evening skies. Each touch, each shared cup becomes a stitch in a comforting quilt of shared experience. You realize that healing arrives not only in cures or quarantines, but in whispered stories, simple kindnesses, and the steady rhythm of daily life resuming its course. A slow pulse of reassurance ripples through you, reminding you that every dawn follows a dark night. Every spring revives fields once barren, and every community finds a way to mend its tears. The distant hum of modern comforts fans, soft whir, the faint glow of electric lights, the hush of sleepers in homes nearby joins nature's nocturne. These blended rhythms cradle you, bridging centuries of human practice from muraled chapels and herbal remedies to electric coasters and smartphones tucked beneath pillows. Let your thoughts drift now, untethered by fear or urgency. Picture wildflowers blooming around ancient oak roots, laughter drifting from a nearby cottage, and the soft, steady pulse of cicadas marking time's passage. Each gentle vibration reminds you that though plagues recede and shadows pass, life's hum returns, carrying new stories, new hope, and quiet resilience. Rest here in the lull, content that you have witnessed both history's darkest depths and the luminous spark of renewal. Drift on this soft current of tranquility, letting eyelids grow heavy. The meadow fades into dream, where bees may murmur lullabies and ribbons swirl around oak trunks under moonlight. You are held, now not by fear or memory, but by the enduring promise that tomorrow's dawn belongs to those who keep faith with hope. In this quiet embrace, you find rest, warmth, and the gentle reassurance that life, in all its fragile beauty, carries on. End of script. Sweet dreams.